There is a particular cruelty in a dead man's signature. The living may be doubted, cross-examined, made to account for themselves, but a name set down by a hand 3 weeks in the river carries an authority no witness can match. I have learned to distrust that authority above all others. Miles Hartwell. If you have found your way to these old cases from some far corner of the world, I should like to know which one. Leave the name of your city below, that I might imagine you listening. And if the company of Baker Street suits you, the bell here rings only for those who subscribe. Tonight's affair concerns a policy of marine insurance, an underwriter who drowned within sight of Wapping Old Stairs, and the impossible thing he did afterward. I have called it the drowned hand. Holmes had been 3 days without a case, and the flat had begun to suffer for it. I came down that gray October morning to find the sitting room fogged with shag tobacco, and my friend stretched along the sofa in his mouse-colored dressing gown, the Persian slipper open on his breast, firing pistol shots of smoke at the ceiling. He had not shaved. On the mantel, propped against the tobacco jar, was a telegram he had plainly read a dozen times and answered not at all. "You will ruin your lungs and Mrs. Hudson's plaster in a single week," I said, opening the window a hand's breadth against his protest. "I shall ruin nothing worth the name if London persists in its present honesty." He did not turn his head. 4 days, Watson. 4 days and not one crime committed with the smallest particle of imagination. A clerk absconds with the petty cash. A grocer's wife poisons a grocer. I begin to think the criminal classes have taken up golf. I said nothing and busied myself with the coffee. Experience had taught me that the black moods passed most quickly when least attended, and that a word of sympathy only fed them. I had my cup half to my lips when the bell rang below, sharp and twice, and I saw Holmes's eyes open. "Ah," he said softly. The transformation was instant and complete, as it always was. The languid invalid of a moment before was gone, and a lean and eager face had turned toward the stair. A man in a hurry, and one unaccustomed to hurrying. Heavy on the first step, hesitant on the fourth. He is deciding even now whether he has been a fool to come. The man Mrs. Hudson showed up to us was perhaps 55, broad and florid, dressed with the sober expense of the city, a good black coat, a heavy watch chain, gloves he had not thought to remove. He carried a leather document case pressed against his ribs as a man carries a thing he is afraid to set down. His eyes went from Holmes to me and back, with the particular unease of one who has spent his life among ledgers and finds himself, for the first time, unable to make a column balance. "Mr. Holmes, I am glad to find you at home. My name is Bellingham, Gideon Bellingham, of the Adriatic Marine Syndicate at Lloyd's. I have come on a matter that I cannot make sense of, and I have reached the point where a man either makes sense of a thing or he does not sleep." He glanced at me. "My friend Dr. Watson, you may speak before him with perfect freedom. Indeed, I find I think better with him in the room." Holmes waved him to the basket chair. "You are an underwriter, then. You have come without your breakfast. You dismissed your cab at the corner rather than at the door, and you have carried that case unopened through the streets because you are not yet certain you wish to show its contents even to me. Sit, Mr. Bellingham, and let us have the whole of it." The stout man lowered himself into the chair, and some of the tension went out of his shoulders as it commonly did once a client saw that he was in the presence of a faculty larger than his own trouble. "You are quite right that I hesitated," he said. "I will tell you why in a moment. First, you must understand a little of our trade, or none of the rest will signify." He set the document case on his knees, but did not open it. "At Lloyd's, Mr. Holmes, a man's name is his fortune and his bond both. When a policy is underwritten, a ship, a cargo, a voyage, the underwriters set down their names and the share of the risk each will carry. The name is everything. A signature on the slip is a promise to pay, and the whole vast edifice of marine insurance rests upon the certainty that the man who wrote his name wrote it in his own hand, of his own will, being alive to do so." "A reasonable foundation," Holmes murmured. "Go on." "3 weeks ago last Thursday, one of our number died. Josiah Merrick." Bellingham said the name with a heaviness that told me the two had not been strangers. "A senior underwriter, a man of 30 years' standing, respected, feared a little, if I am honest. He had a cold way with him, and a memory like a steel trap. He drowned in the Thames, off Wapping Old Stairs, on the night of the 17th. He had dined late, it seems, and walking home along the river in the dark, he went into the water. The body was recovered 2 days after. There was an inquest. Misadventure. We closed his desk, divided his book among the syndicate, and mourned him as decently as such men are mourned. You have my sympathy, I said, for the man's plain distress deserved it. Thank you, Doctor. He drew a breath. Now here is the thing that has brought me to Baker Street. Yesterday morning a policy came across my desk for countersignature, a large policy on the bark Sumatra Queen, laden and bound for Calcutta. A perfectly ordinary piece of business, save for one detail. His florid face had gone the color of tallow. It bears Josiah Merrick's signature, his name, in his own hand. I would swear to that hand, in any court in England, underwriting a £2,000 share. Holmes had gone very still. The date upon the policy? The 11th of October. Bellingham's voice dropped. 6 days before he drowned. And that, Mr. Holmes, is what I cannot make lie down quietly in my mind. For I have been through our office slips going back a month, and there is no record of Merrick handling the Sumatra Queen risk. It was never on his desk. It passed through the syndicate on the 9th and closed on the 12th, and his initials appear nowhere in the working papers, only now this finished policy, dated the 11th, signed in a dead man's hand, surfacing 3 weeks after he was in his grave. A signature dated before the death, Holmes said slowly, is not in itself impossible. A living man of the 11th signs. He drowns on the 17th. The paper is merely slow to come to light. So I told myself, sir, for the better part of the day. I am not an imaginative man, and I distrust a mystery as I distrust a leak in a hull. Bellingham's hands worked upon the leather. But I could not let it rest, and last night I did a thing I have not the training for. I took the policy to the window, and I looked at that name against a genuine slip of Merrick's, one I knew he had signed in September, before all this. And Mr. Holmes, he leaned forward, I am no expert, but the two signatures are not the same color. Holmes's eyes glittered. Not the same color. The old one has gone brown. a deep, settled brown, the way old ink does. The new one, the one on the Sumatra Queen policy, that should be a good 6 weeks old by any reckoning, it is black. Black and fresh, as if the pen had scarcely dried. He sat back, spent by the effort of the confession. "I do not know what I am saying, sir. Ink is ink. But a dead man cannot have signed a paper yesterday, and yet the ink on that paper looks to me as if it were written yesterday. I have carried it about all morning, not knowing whether I am a fool or the only man at Lloyd's who has seen something he ought not." For a long moment Holmes said nothing. Then he rose, crossed to the window, and stood with his back to us, his thin fingers laced behind him, looking down into the grey stir of Baker Street. "You are not a fool, Mr. Bellingham," he said at last, without turning. "You are an honest man who has noticed a true thing and been frightened by it, which is the beginning of all good detection and most bad dreams. Let me see the policy." Bellingham opened the case then, with the reluctance of a man drawing a splinter, and laid 2 papers side by side upon the deal table. Holmes bent over them with his lens, and I saw his shoulders settle into the particular stillness that meant the whole of his attention had narrowed to a point. He said nothing for a full 2 minutes. I have known men fill a room with talk who said less in an hour than Holmes said in that silence. "You are quite right about the color," he remarked finally. "Interesting, very interesting." He did not, I noticed, say anything further about what the color might mean. He only folded the lens away and looked at Bellingham with a new and level regard. "Tell me, who has handled the Sumatra Queen policy besides yourself?" "It came to me from the syndicate's clerk, Pruitt, Alastair Pruitt. He keeps our correspondence and our fair copies, a most reliable man. He has been with the Adriatic 7 years. And it was Pruitt who brought it to your desk for countersignature." "It was." "Did he remark upon anything? The date? The hand?" "No, sir. He is not the remarking kind. He set it down with the day's papers and went about his work." Bellingham hesitated. "Though now you put it to me, he did say, as he laid it down, that it was poor Mr. Merrick's last piece of business, and a tidy one. I thought it a decent enough sentiment at the time." "Did you?" Holmes's voice was perfectly colorless, and I, who knew him, heard in that colorlessness the small click of a thing being filed away. "I think, Mr. Bellingham, that I should like to see your offices, and your Mr. Pruitt, and the desk that belonged to Josiah Merrick. Would this afternoon be convenient?" The offices of the Adriatic Marine Syndicate lay off Leadenhall Street, up a worn stone stair, in 3 rooms that smelt of tar rope, sealing wax, and the particular dry mustiness of paper kept too long. A coal fire struggled in the grate of the main room, more smoke than warmth, and the light that came through the grimed windows had the grey underwater quality of the city in October. Along one wall ran the great ledgers of the syndicate's business, rank on rank of scuffed calf spines. Along another, a row of high desks where 3 clerks sat at their copying, and did not look up as we came in the manner of men trained never to seem curious about a principal's visitors. I marked the nearest of them without meaning to, for there was nothing in him to mark. a lean, greyish man of 40 or so, stooped over his fair copies, his pen moving in the small, even strokes of one who had made a life's habit of neatness. He did not raise his head. Only, as Bellingham led us past toward the inner room, I had the passing impression that the pen had paused for the breadth of a heartbeat, and that a pair of quiet eyes had gone over us once, from under lowered lids, and returned to the page before I could be sure of it. I thought nothing of it then. A clerk may look up at strangers and be none the worse for it. It was only afterward that I remembered the pause, and understood that the most watchful man in the room had been the one who seemed least to watch at all. Bellingham took us through to the inner room that had been Merrick's. It was a cold, orderly cell of a place, the desk cleared, the shelves half emptied where the dead man's private books had been carried away. A window looked down into a well of soot-black brick. "We have touched little," said Bellingham. "There seemed no hurry. His nephew is to have the personal effects, once the estate is settled." His nephew? Holmes was drawing off his gloves, his eyes travelling the room in the swift, cataloguing way I knew. Merrick was unmarried, then? A widower these 15 years, no children living. The nephew, Mr. Cardew Merrick, his brother's son, is the heir. A young man. He does something in the wine trade, I understand, or did until lately. Until lately? Bellingham coloured slightly. I ought not to gossip, but it was known in the office that the young man had run himself into difficulties, debts of the sporting kind. He came here more than once in the last half-year to see his uncle, and the interviews were not, I think, affectionate. Josiah Merrick was not a man to open his purse to a spendthrift, uncle or no. There were words. Once the whole office heard them through that door. He nodded to the inner door, then seemed to regret having spoken. But the young man inherits a comfortable sum now, poor devil, so I suppose his troubles are behind him. It is an ill wind. It is indeed, said Holmes gravely, an ill wind. And I saw him look, just once, and without expression, at the closed inner door through which the office had heard an angry nephew quarrel with the man who was shortly to drown. He went over the room slowly. He knelt at the empty grate. He ran a finger along the underside of the desk. He stood a while at the window, measuring, I think, the drop and the light. Then he turned his attention to the desk itself, opening each drawer in turn, and it was in the shallow top drawer that he paused. Merrick kept his own ink, he observed. It was not quite a question. Most of the senior men do, a matter of pride. Bellingham peered over his shoulder. That would be his stand, yes. We have not disturbed it. The inkstand was a heavy affair of brass and cut glass, 2 wells beneath hinged brass caps. Holmes lifted one cap, then the other, and bent his long nose almost to the glass. He dipped the tip of a clean pen nib into the nearer well, drew it out, and examined the bead of ink upon it in the grey window light, with an interest out of all proportion, I should have said, to a dead man's inkpot. You keep the wells filled, as a matter of habit, even now? Bellingham looked blank. I could not say, Mr. Holmes. Pruitt tends to the office ink, fills the wells of a Monday, the standing arrangement. Whether he has kept on filling a dead man's stand, I really cannot tell you. Is it of consequence? Everything in a locked room is of consequence until it is proved otherwise, Holmes replied, and capped the wells and said no more of it. But he had gone very quiet, and I knew the mood. It was the mood of a man who has found the first true thread and is being careful now not to pull it before he has found the second. We did not that afternoon meet Pruitt, for the clerk had gone out upon the syndicate's business and was not expected back before the close. But as we descended the worn stone stair into the fading light of Leadenhall Street, Holmes paused upon the last step. An underwriter's own ink, he said half to himself, kept filled by an attentive clerk, a signature that is the wrong color, a quarrelsome nephew who inherits, and a body from the river. He drew on his gloves with a snap. "There are 4 threads there, Watson, and I will not swear yet which of them is the rope and which the frayed ends. But I will tell you one thing for nothing. The most respectable-looking fact in this case is a lie, and when we have found which one it is, we shall have our man." The morning after our visit to Leadenhall Street brought a raw wind off the river, and Holmes announced over the breakfast things that we should go and look at the place where Josiah Merrick had drowned. "There is a certain vanity in examining the desk of a dead man," he said, buttering his toast with the deliberation of one whose mind was 3 miles east of his hands. "But the river is a witness that does not lie, Watson, and it keeps better hours than any clerk. Merrick went into the Thames at Wapping. I should like to know precisely where and precisely when, and I should like to hear it from a man who was on the water, and not from an inquest that wished chiefly to go home to its dinner." We took a hansom down through the city and into the mean streets that crowd the north bank below the Tower, where the great warehouses lean over lanes so narrow that 2 carts cannot pass, and the air is thick with the smell of tar and spice and the brown breath of the tideway. Wapping Old Stairs is an ancient descent to the water between 2 of these warehouses, a flight of worn stone steps green with weed at the foot, where watermen have taken up and set down their fares since before the memory of anyone living. At the top of the stairs, in a doorway out of the wind, we found the man we had come for. Holmes had learned his name from the inquest report. Ezra Dowson was a waterman of perhaps 60, with a face the color and texture of old harness, and hands so knotted that they seemed hardly able to close, though I have no doubt they could still pull an oar against the ebb when it was asked of them. He looked at us with the flat, unhurried suspicion of a man to whom gentlemen from the West End have rarely meant anything but trouble. "It was Dowson who recovered the body, was it not?" Holmes asked, when a shilling had changed the temperature of the conversation somewhat. "Aye, found him myself 2 mornings after, hung up on the chains off the Prospect." The old man jerked his chin downriver. "Weren't no mystery to it. Gentleman goes in the water at night. Gentleman comes up 2 days after where the tide leaves him. I've seen it 100 times. "Tell me about the night. You were on the water?" "I were. Late tide, waiting on a ship's master as never come." Dowson spat into the wind. "Heard a splash, up past the stairs. Thought it a barge load shifting, or a dog. Weren't nothing to see, dark as a sack. Next I knew it were 2 days, and there he were on the chains." Holmes had gone very quiet, and I saw that his eyes, half closed against the wind, had taken on the fixed and inward look that meant he was doing sums. "When did you hear this splash, Mr. Dowson? Can you fix the hour?" The waterman considered, chewing on a stump of unlit pipe. "Near on midnight. The tide were near the top of the flood, just on the turn. I mind it, because I were cursing the master for keeping me past the slack." He looked at Holmes with the first flicker of something other than suspicion. "Why's a gentleman want to know the state of the tide 3 weeks gone?" "Bear with me. You are certain of the hour of the flood. A tide does not oblige a man's memory." "I don't keep it in my memory, governor. I keep it in my bones." Dowson jerked a thumb at the brown water sliding past the foot of the stairs. 40 year I've worked this reach. I don't need no almanac to tell me when she's making and when she's ebbing, no more than you need one to tell you it's raining. Top of the flood that night were a shade past midnight, and she'd been making hard for 6 hours afore. You can look it in Bradshaw's tide tables if my word won't serve, but you'll find they say the same, only slower. Your word serves admirably. Holmes had drawn out a small notebook and was setting down figures. And the prospect of Whitby, where the body hung up on the chains, that is downstream of these stairs. How far? 1/2 mile, near enough, down toward the pool. Downstream, Holmes repeated, and underlined the word twice. He stood a moment, looking from the stairs to the reach of water and back, and I saw his lips move in some private calculation. Then he asked a thing that seemed to me, at that moment, wholly beside the point. "When you found him on the second morning, Mr. Dowson, was the body much marked, fouled by the water, tangled in weed, knocked about by the traffic on the river?" The old man's brows drew down. "Now that's a queer question, and I'll tell you it's a queer answer. He weren't. 2 days in this river, and a body's a sorry sight, chewed by the tide and the mooring chains, and God knows what. But him," Dowson shook his head slowly, "him I could have took for a man asleep, near enough. Clean, like he'd not been in the water above a few hours. I said so to the coroner's man, and he wrote it down, and never asked me more." I saw Holmes go very still, in the way he did when a stray fact came home to a place he had prepared for it, but he only nodded, and made another note, and asked his last question in the same idle tone. "Why's a gentleman want to know the state of the tide 3 weeks gone, you asked me. I will tell you honestly, Mr. Dowson, because I do not believe the man went into the water where the world says he did. Because the tide, Mr. Dowson, is the one honest party in this affair." Holmes turned up his collar. "You say the flood was near the top, just on the turn, when you heard the splash above the stairs, and you found him 2 days later downstream, on the chains off the prospect of Whitby. Downstream. That's the way of it." "It is not," said Holmes, so softly that the old man leaned in to hear him, "the way of it at all. For if a man goes into the water above these stairs, at the top of the flood, the tide that is still making will carry him up, Mr. Dowson, upstream, toward the bridges. He would not come down to the prospect until the ebb had run a full turn and more, and by your account he was in the water only a little before the turn." He straightened. "The river carried Josiah Merrick where you found him, but it could not have carried him there, from where you heard your splash, at the hour you heard it. One of those two things is wrong. How do you make that out?" But the old man had gone quiet under it, following. Simply enough. A thing in the water goes where the water goes. At the top of the flood, the stream still sets upriver. A body entering above the stairs at that hour drifts up, not down, and would be carried toward London Bridge before the ebb ever turned it back. To fetch up 1/2 mile downstream at the Prospect, your man must have gone in on the ebb hours later than your splash, or lower down the reach than these stairs. The tide keeps an honest account, Mr. Dowson, and it will not lend itself to any tale that does not add up. Yours does not add up. And there is the second thing. He nodded downriver toward the pool. You told me the body was clean, scarcely marked, like a man a few hours in the water, not 2 days. A body 2 days on the flood, knocking the length of this reach against chain and hull and mooring post, comes up battered. You have seen 100, and you said as much. This one did not, which tells me it was not 2 days in the water at all. It was put in not long before it was found, and put in low down, near where it was to be recovered, so that the little journey should leave few marks upon it. The waterman stared at him. For a long moment the only sound was the wind worrying at the warehouse eaves, and the slap of water on the stones below. "I heard what I heard," he said at last, but the certainty had gone out of him, and he looked out over the grey water as though it might settle the matter for him. "'Appen the splash weren't him. 'Appen he went in somewhere else, some other hour, and I never heard it at all." "Happen he did," said Holmes gravely. "That is precisely what I begin to think." We left the old man to his doorway and his doubts, and walked back up the lane in silence until we came again to the noise of the streets. I could contain myself no longer. "You believe Merrick went into the river at some other place, some other time than the inquest supposed?" "I believe, Watson, that a man was found downstream who could not have got there by the account we have been given, and that when a body will not fit the story told about it, it is usually the story that is at fault, and not the body." He hailed a cab with his stick. "The inquest heard a splash near midnight, and a corpse 2 days later, and being an inquest, it drew a line between the 2 points, and called it a death. But the river will not be so accommodating. If Merrick was on the chains off the Prospect on the second morning, then he went into the water lower down, or earlier than we have been told, and the difference of an hour or a 1/2 mile may be the whole difference between misadventure and murder." "But consider what your reading requires," I said, for the thing troubled me as we climbed into the cab. "If the body was fresh when found, and put into the water only hours before, then Merrick died 2 days earlier and was kept somewhere in the interval." "That is a monstrous business, Holmes. A man does not carry a corpse about London for 2 days. Where would it lie?" "You put your finger on the very difficulty, and it is a real one. I do not wave it away." Holmes settled back as the cab lurched forward over the cobbles. "Yet it is not so monstrous as it sounds, if the death and the concealment served a purpose. Suppose the murderer needed the death to fall upon a particular night, and not upon the night it truly happened. Suppose there was a reason the world must believe Merrick alive some days longer than he was. Then the body must be kept out of sight until the chosen hour, and slipped into the river at the last, low down, to be found where the tide would leave it and the tale would fit." He tapped his stick against the floor of the cab. "I do not yet know the reason. But a man does not go to the frightful labour of hiding a corpse and misdating a drowning, unless the date itself is worth a murder to him. Fix your mind on that, Watson. Not the how of it for the moment, the why of the date. You are guessing, I said a little sharply, for the whole edifice seemed to me built on a waterman's memory and a lens full of ink. I am supposing, which is a lawful thing to do so long as one does not fall in love with one's suppositions. He gave me a sidelong, glinting look, and I may be wrong in the particulars. I have been wrong before, and will be again, and if the ledgers give me the lie, I shall abandon the whole structure without a pang. But the tide is not a supposition, and the fresh body is not a supposition, and a signature, the wrong color, is not a supposition. 3 hard facts, Watson, that the accepted story cannot hold. When the accepted story cannot hold 3 facts, it is time to look for a better story. He gave the driver the address of the Adriatic offices. There is a clock hidden in this case, and someone has been at pains to set its hands wrong. I mean to find out who winds it. It was at the syndicate offices that same afternoon that we first laid eyes upon young Cardew Merrick, and I confess that if I had been asked on the strength of that meeting alone to name the guilty man, I should have named him without a moment's hesitation. He was there when we arrived, in the outer office, in a low and evidently unpleasant conversation with Bellingham, and the words that reached us on the stair were not the words of a grieving heir. "Tell me it is tied up in the estate for a 12-month, and I tell you I have creditors who will not wait a 12-month, and whose uncle's money it is in any case." He broke off when he saw us, and the flush of temper on his handsome young face gave way to a wary, sullen composure. He was perhaps 28, well-made, expensively and carelessly dressed, with the slightly puffed and restless look of a young man who kept late hours at tables where money changed hands quickly. Bellingham performed the introductions with visible relief at the interruption. "Mr. Holmes is looking into a small irregularity in your uncle's last affairs," he said, choosing his words with care. "Irregularity?" The young man's eyes went sharp. "What irregularity? The old man drowned. There's nothing irregular in that, unless the river has grown a conscience." He gave a short, unlovely laugh, and then, seeing that it had fallen badly, scowled. "I beg your pardon. I have not slept. This business has been a great strain." "No doubt," said Holmes, in a tone of such perfect neutrality that it might have meant anything. "You were on affectionate terms with your uncle, Mr. Merrick." "We were on such terms as a rich uncle and a poor nephew are ever on." The young man met his eye with a flash of the family hardness Bellingham had spoken of. He thought me a wastrel, and I thought him a miser, and we were each, I dare say, a little right. If you are asking whether I am sorry he is dead, Mr. Holmes, I will tell you plainly that I am sorry for the manner of it, and glad of the consequence, and if that makes me a monster in your eyes, then I am a monster who does not trouble to lie about it. He took up his hat. "I inherit. I do not pretend to grieve a man who never had a kind word for me living. But I did not push him into the Thames, if that is your drift, for the excellent reason that on the night he drowned, I was at the Cavendish, losing £40 at whist in front of 9 witnesses, and you are welcome to every one of their names." He gave them, in fact, before he left, with an angry candour that was itself a kind of argument, and stalked out, and we heard his feet going down the stair 2 at a time. "A charming young man," I observed. a truthful one, I fancy, which is rarer and more useful. Holmes was looking thoughtfully at the door. He inherits. He needs money. He quarreled with the dead man. He does not trouble to hide his relief. He is precisely the man a sensible inspector would arrest, and precisely for that reason I should be sorry to arrest him. Lestrade will want him within the week. Watson, remind me to prevent it. You do not think he did it? I think, my dear fellow, that a man who gives you 9 alibi witnesses unasked and offers their names with his fists clenched is a man telling the truth in a temper. It is the grieving nephews who weep prettily and cannot quite remember where they were that I lock my door against. He drew out his watch. No, young Cardew is our red herring, laid across the trail by nothing more cunning than his own bad character. The question is, who benefits from his being so very convenient a suspect? Come, I want another word with the invaluable Mr. Pruitt, who fills the inkwells of the dead. I confess that I did not that evening wholly share Holmes's readiness to let the young man go, for it seemed to me that fury is easily counterfeited, and an alibi is a thing that ought to be tested rather than admired. So while my friend bent over the ink and the ledgers, I took it upon myself to go quietly to the Cavendish and found the whist room, and spoke to 2 of the men whose names Cardew had flung at us. What I learned did not comfort the case against him. He had been there the night of the 17th, from before 10 until near 2 in the morning, loud and unlucky, and much observed. The marker remembered the run of bad hands, and a waiter recalled fetching him brandy he could ill afford. There was no gap in it, no quiet half-hour in which a nephew might have slipped down to the river and back. But when I brought this to Holmes, expecting to have narrowed the field, he only nodded as though I had told him the day was Tuesday. You have proved he was at his cards on the 17th. I do not doubt it. But you are still counting from the wrong night, Watson, as the coroner counted, and as we are meant to count. He did not look up from the page. If I am right about the tide, Merrick did not die on the 17th at all. He died 2 days sooner, and was only put into the river on the night your witnesses can account for so handsomely. An alibi for the 17th proves nothing of the 15th. Do you see the neatness of it? The false date does not merely hide the killer's own movements. It hands every other man a spotless alibi for a night on which no murder was done, and sets the whole world to proving where it stood, while the true hour goes unwatched. He turned a leaf. It was well done of you to go, all the same. A hypothesis tested and left standing is worth more than one merely admired. Cardew is cleared. Now I should like to know where a certain careful clerk was on the 15th of the month. We found Pruitt at his high desk in the outer room, and he came down from his stool at Bellingham's word, and stood before us with his hands folded, a lean, grey, careful man of perhaps 40, with a clerk's stoop and a clerk's soft, apologetic manner, and eyes that missed nothing while appearing to attend only to the floor. He had the ink-stained forefinger of his trade, and the ready, colourless deference of a man who has spent 20 years making himself agreeable to his betters. "You wished to see me, sir?" His voice was low and even. "I am sure I will help however I am able. Poor Mr. Merrick's affairs have been a grief to us all." "You handled his correspondence, I understand," said Holmes. "For some years." "I had that honor. Mr. Merrick was particular about his letters, sir, and did me the kindness to trust them to my hand. I copied his outgoing and kept his incoming, and when his own hand was tired, as it grew of late, I would sometimes take his dictation and set it fair for his signature. He said it modestly, a good servant's small pride. 7 years, sir. I flatter myself I know his ways as well as any man now living." "His ways," Holmes repeated, "and his hand?" Something in the question, or in the pause before it, made the clerk look up from the floor. For the briefest instant, I saw the careful eyes come to rest on Holmes's face, with an attention quite different from the deference of a moment before. Then it was gone, and the stoop and the soft voice were back. "His hand, sir? I could not forge Mr. Merrick's signature, if that is your meaning." A small, deprecating smile. No honest clerk could, nor would wish to. "I said nothing of forgery," Holmes observed mildly. "No, sir. I beg your pardon. It is only that where there is a question over a gentleman's papers, that is the word that follows, and I would not have it thought—" He stopped and folded his hands the tighter. "I copied Mr. Merrick's letters. I did not sign his name. There is all the difference in the world, sir, and I have my character to think of." It was smoothly done. Had I not glanced at Holmes, I might have thought nothing of it. But I had glanced at Holmes, and I saw that under his half-lowered lids he was watching the clerk with the still, unblinking regard of a cat at a mouse-hole, and I understood that something in that soft, over-quick disclaimer had told my friend a great deal. Holmes let the small denial lie where it had fallen, and turned instead to gentler ground, and I watched him play the clerk as a fisherman plays a fish that does not yet know it is hooked. "You were fond of Mr. Merrick, I think?" The word caught. Pruitt's hands, folded before him, tightened one upon the other. "He was a hard man to be fond of, sir, if I'm to be truthful. Particular, cold in his ways, but a fair master, and I'd been with him a long time, and there's a kind of— I don't know the word for it." He stopped and looked at the floor and started again, plainer. "You get used to a man, his hand, his ways of doing. 20 years I copied for the senior men, and 7 of them for him, and now his desk's cleared, and it's a strange thing to pass of a morning. That's all I meant. I'm not a clever man with words, sir. Few of us are, upon the things that matter." Holmes's voice had gone kind, and I knew that kindness for the most dangerous weapon in his armory. "It must have grieved you, then, to hear how he died, alone, in the dark, by the water." The clerk's throat worked. For a moment I thought some real thing would come out of him, and perhaps it nearly did. Then the careful shutter came down again, and he said only, low, "A dreadful thing, sir. I try not to dwell on it," and would say no more, and dropped his eyes, and Holmes did not press him. He asked a few more questions after that, easy ones, about the ordering of the office and the keeping of the ink, and Pruitt answered them all with the same low readiness, and confirmed without hesitation that yes, it fell to him to fill the wells of a Monday, the seniors' stands included, and that he had continued to fill poor Mr. Merrick's out of habit and respect, it not seeming decent to let the good man's stand run dry while his desk was yet warm. And then Holmes thanked him, and we took our leave, and it was not until we were out in Leadenhall Street and walking west against the crowd that he spoke. "Did you mark it, Watson?" He was uneasy at the word forgery, but an honest clerk might well be, with his character at stake. He was uneasy before the word was spoken. I never used it. He supplied it himself, and hurried to deny a thing of which no one had accused him. Holmes threaded through a knot of drovers without slackening his pace. There is a species of denial that is worth more than any confession, and it is the denial of the charge that has not yet been made. But that is not the whole of it, nor the best of it. He stopped so abruptly that a man behind cannoned into him. "He fills the inkwells, Watson, every Monday, including the well on a dead man's desk. Now why, in the name of sense, would a scheming man keep filling the ink of the very stand he no longer needs, unless—" He did not finish. His eyes had gone bright and far. "Unless the stand is the one thing in this office he needs most of all. Come, I have been slow. I have been looking at the signature, and I ought to have been looking at the ink." He would say no more in the street, and it was not until we were back in the sitting-room at Baker Street, with the lamp lit against the early dark and the two papers spread once more upon the table, that the thing he had been circling came at last into the open. "Let us begin," he said, "with what every one in this affair has agreed to believe, for the beliefs we have not examined are always where the deception hides. Every one believes that a dead man's signature has appeared upon a fresh policy, and so every one has been asking the same question. How did the dead man come to sign it? Bellingham asks it, the office asks it, and I confess that for the better part of 2 days I asked it myself. He tapped the newer paper. It is the wrong question, Watson. It has been the wrong question from the first, and a wrong question, pursued diligently, will keep a clever man busy for a lifetime, and never let him near the truth. Then what is the right one? The right question is not how the dead man signed the paper, but why anyone should need us to believe he did. He held up the lens and beckoned me to look. Observe the ink of this newer signature, black, fresh, scarcely oxidized. Bellingham, with no chemistry at all, saw the truth and drew back from it because it frightened him. Iron gall ink, Watson, goes on to the paper a pale gray-black, and darkens as it dries, and goes on darkening for weeks as the iron in it takes the air, until it settles at last to the deep brown you see in the September slip here. That browning is a clock. It cannot be hurried, and it cannot be counterfeited. This signature, that purports to have been made on the 11th of October, 6 weeks gone, ought to be as brown as its neighbor. It is black. It was written, I should judge, within the last few days. I looked from the one name to the other, and now that he had shown me, the difference that Bellingham had groped toward was as plain as paint. Then the signature is a forgery after all. Someone wrote Merrick's name last week and dated it before his death. Someone did. But mark what follows, for this is where the whole matter turns over, like a hull in a storm. Holmes set down the lens and looked at me, with the particular intensity he reserved for the moment a case gave up its shape. If the signature was forged last week, Then no dead man signed anything, and there is no resurrection to explain. The dead man is only dead. But then the forger has taken a very strange pain, Watson. He has not simply forged a document. He has forged a document dated before the death, and let it surface after, in a way certain to draw the eye and raise exactly the question that has brought Bellingham to our door. A clever forger wants his forgery to pass unnoticed. This one has produced a forgery that could not fail to be noticed. Why? I cannot see why. Nor could I, until a waterman told me the tide ran the wrong way, and a clerk denied a crime no one had charged him with, and I put the three together. He rose and stood by the fire, his back to it, his thin face lit from below. Consider. We have a signature written last week, but dated before the death. We have a body that went into the river earlier or lower than the story allows, its true hour disguised. And we have a man, Pruitt, who for 7 years has held Josiah Merrick's correspondence in his own hand, who fills the dead man's inkwell every Monday still, and who leaps to deny forgery before the word is out of anyone's mouth. He let the fire warm the silence a moment. I no longer think, Watson, that we are asked to explain how a dead man signed a paper. I think we are meant to be so busy explaining it that we never ask the only question that matters. What did the living Josiah Merrick know that made it necessary for him to stop being alive? I sat with that for a while, turning it, and the more I turned it, the darker it grew. You were saying that the forgery is not the crime. It is the cover for the crime. I am saying it is a signal flag run up to draw the fleet's fire while the real ship slips out under the fog. Holmes took up his pipe and did not light it, only held it, as he did when he wanted his hands occupied and his mind free. Look again at what the forgery accomplishes. It does not merely fake a piece of business. It fixes a date. It plants in the mind of the whole syndicate the firm impression that Josiah Merrick was alive and signing policies on the 11th of October in the ordinary course with nothing amiss. It writes the dead man's ordinary, blameless continuance into the record. And a man goes to that trouble, Watson, only when there is something about Merrick's last days that he most urgently does not wish looked into. The signature itself, I said slowly. You said Pruitt could copy his hand. He as good as told us so. 7 years of his correspondence. He takes his dictation. He sets his letters fair. There is no man alive better placed to write Josiah Merrick's name so that Josiah Merrick himself would own it. Holmes's eyes narrowed. And that, I fancy, is not a talent he has discovered only this month. A man does not forge his master's signature for the first time to cover a murder. He forges it to cover the murder, because he has been forging it for years, and the murder became necessary when the master found him out. The fire settled in the grate. Outside, a hansom went by over the wet stones, and its sound seemed to come from very far away. There is a ledger discrepancy, I said. Bellingham mentioned it that first morning. Small sums to an account Merrick never used. He did mention it, and I confess I let it lie, being then still busy with the wrong question. Holmes struck a match at last, and drew the flame down into the bowl, and the little glow lit the satisfaction gathering in his face. But it will not have gone away. Tomorrow, Watson, we shall ask Mr. Bellingham for the syndicate's premium ledgers going back 3 years, and I shall be very much surprised if we do not find, threaded through them, a long, patient, cautious skimming of small sums out of policies that passed through the hand of the man who kept the fair copies. A shilling here, a few pounds there, from premiums no senior would trouble to check, all diverted to some quiet account. It is the slow crime of a careful man, and somewhere in the last weeks of his life, Josiah Merrick, with his memory like a steel trap, saw a figure that would not reconcile, and pulled the thread, and understood what his invaluable clerk had been doing under his nose for years. And so Merrick had to die. Before he could lay it before the syndicate, and Pruitt, with his back to the wall, did the only thing that would save him. He put an end to the one man who knew. Holmes drew on the pipe. But here is the difficulty that has made this case worth the name, and that Pruitt, to his cost, understood better than most murderers. It was not enough to kill Merrick. A dead accuser is dangerous, for death invites inquiry, and inquiry might open the very ledgers Merrick had begun to examine. Pruitt needed the death to be quiet, unremarkable, closed. Misadventure. A tired old man who walked into the river in the dark. No question asked, no book reopened, the estate wound up, the fair copies undisturbed. That is what the false hour on the tide was for, to blur the death into an accident. And the forged policy, he paused. The forged policy undoes all that, I objected. It is the one thing that drew inquiry. It brought Bellingham straight to your door. Why should Pruitt forge the very paper that reopens everything? Ah, Holmes's smile was thin and cold and delighted. That, Watson, is the flaw in the perfect crime, and the place where the careful man was too clever by half. He did not forge it to reopen the case. He forged it because he could not help himself, and because a scheme of years cannot always be halted the instant it becomes inconvenient. Consider, the Sumatra Queen risk closed on the 12th of October. It bore, in the ordinary run of the fraud, a share underwritten in Merrick's name, from which Pruitt meant to skim as he had skimmed 100 times. He had, I do not doubt, already written that share into his private reckoning. Then Merrick discovered him and had to be silenced, and was silenced on the 17th. And now Pruitt is left with a half-finished piece of fraud upon a policy that must, in the nature of the business, be produced and countersigned, bearing a share in the name of a man the world believes died on the 17th. If it surfaces dated after the death, the fraud is naked. So he does the only thing he can. He completes the forgery, dates it the 11th, before the death, and lets it come forward as poor Mr. Merrick's last piece of business. He gambled that a signature dated safely before the death would raise no question. Holmes tapped out the pipe. He did not reckon on iron gall ink, and he did not reckon on Gideon Bellingham being honest enough and frightened enough to notice that a 6-week-old signature was still wet. We were at the Adriatic offices when the doors opened the next morning, and Bellingham, whom Holmes had prepared by a note the night before, had the premium ledgers waiting, 3 heavy volumes bound in scuffed calf, the syndicate's whole business for as many years, ruled in a dozen clerkly hands. I have told the office you are auditing Merrick's outstanding book for the estate, Bellingham murmured, drawing us into the inner room and shutting the door. It seemed wiser than the truth. Pruitt is at his desk. He does not know you are looking at the premiums. He hesitated. I confess, Mr. Holmes, I do not rightly know what we are looking for. Nor precisely do I, said Holmes, drawing off his coat and settling to the first volume, which is the honest condition of most searches worth making. We are looking for a leak, Mr. Bellingham, a small, patient, cunning leak, of the kind a careful hand makes over years, that no one man's eye would ever catch, because no one man ever adds up the whole. Watson, take the second volume. Bellingham, the third. Read me every premium receipted into an account you do not know, every figure that does not run to the syndicate's own bankers. Slowly. We are in no hurry, and haste is the leak-maker's best friend. I have sat through some tedious hours in Holmes's company, but few to rival the next 4. The columns swam, the clerkly hands blurred one into another. Twice I thought I had found something, and twice Holmes, glancing across, showed me it was merely a client's own broker taking his lawful commission. The coal fire burned down and was not made up. My eyes ached, and I will own that after the 3rd hour I began to wonder, privately, whether my friend had for once built a great edifice of deduction upon a foundation of ink color and a waterman's faulty memory, and whether we should rise from these ledgers with nothing but stiff necks. Holmes felt the doubt in me, as he always did. "You are losing faith, Watson," he said without looking up. "I can hear it in the way you turn the pages. Keep reading. A man who hides a thing in a ledger relies upon exactly the boredom you are now feeling. It is his ally and our enemy, and we defeat it only by refusing to be beaten by it." There was, in the middle of that long forenoon, a false dawn that I record because it shows the true color of such work, which the storybooks leave out. Some little while before noon, I lit upon a series of payments, 6 of them, running out of the syndicate's account to a name I did not know, one H. Sowerby, in sums that struck me as irregular and unexplained, and I called Holmes to them with a rush of triumph. He read them over twice, and my heart rose, and then he set the volume down with a small dry sound that was almost a laugh at himself. "A good eye, Watson, and a false scent, which is the commonest reward of a good eye. Sowerby is the syndicate's average adjuster. Bellingham will confirm it. These are his fees, paid quarterly, irregular only because his work is irregular. There is nothing here." He rubbed his eyes with finger and thumb. "I had half hoped, I confess. It is the danger of the search. One wants so badly to find the thing that one begins to see it in every shadow, and a man who lets himself believe his first exciting entry will build a gallows out of an honest adjuster's fee. No, set it aside. The leak we want will not shout at us. It will hide in the very entries that look most ordinary, for that is the whole art of it." And he bent again to his volume, and I to mine, chastened, and the clock ticked on, and I understood that we were not near the end, but somewhere in the dull middle of a thing that would yield only to patience. It was Holmes himself who found the true thread, near the noon hour, and even then it was not the triumphant discovery of the storybooks. He had gone very quiet over a run of entries from the previous spring, and at last he said in a flat voice, "Bellingham, what is Consolidated Northern?" The underwriter came round the table and peered. "Consolidated Northern Assurance? A reinsurance house. We cede risk to them now and again when a line runs heavy. Perfectly regular. There will be dozens of such entries." "There are dozens," Holmes agreed, "and they are all in order, and I nearly passed this by with the rest. But look here, and again in July." His long finger moved down the page. "Ordinary premiums ceded to Consolidated Northern, all of them, save that these three, and I think when we hunt we shall find a score of their brothers, are ceded to Consolidated Northern and Trust, 3 words where the genuine entries have 2. The receiving hand has added a word. And a premium ceded to a house that is almost, but not quite, the name of a real one, will pass every eye in this office forever, because every eye reads what it expects to read." Bellingham had gone white. "There is no Consolidated Northern and Trust," he said slowly. "There is no such house. There is an account in that name, I do not doubt, at some bank that asked no awkward questions when it was opened, and into it, penny by careful penny, for 3 years or more, has run a thin, bright stream of the syndicate's money, skimmed off the top of genuine transactions by a hand that entered the true premium in one place and the false destination in another." Holmes sat back. "It is beautifully done, Bellingham. I say it with professional respect. It is the work of a patient man who understood that the way to steal from a great institution is never to take a great sum, but to take a very small one so often, and so plausibly, that the theft becomes invisible by its own regularity. Now, in whose hand are these 3 entries written?" Bellingham bent to the page, and I saw the last of the color leave his face. "They are fair copies," he said. "The fair copies are all in one hand. They are in Pruitt's." For a moment none of us spoke. Through the closed door came the ordinary sounds of the outer office, the scratch of pens, a cough, the small, dry world of the syndicate going about its morning in perfect ignorance. "Then it is Pruitt," Bellingham whispered. "Pruitt has been robbing us for years, and Merrick found it, and Pruitt—" He could not finish. "Softly," said Holmes. "You have a scheme of theft proven in a clerk's hand, and that is a matter for the magistrates. But a man is not hanged for a false entry in a ledger, and I will not have Josiah Merrick's death laid at any man's door on color and columns alone. We have shown that Pruitt stole. We have not yet shown that he killed, and a clever counsel would tell you rightly that the one does not prove the other. A thief discovered may run, he need not murder." Holmes closed the ledger with quiet finality. "I have the theft. I want the murder, and I want it from his own mouth, and for that we shall need to do more than read. We shall need to make Mr. Pruitt afraid." The trap Holmes laid was a simple one, and rested, like all his best work, upon knowing the exact shape of the fear in another man's mind. "Consider his position," he said to us, low in the inner room, with the door still shut. "Pruitt believes himself entirely safe. The death is written down as misadventure. The estate is closing. The one man who knew of the theft is in the ground. The forged policy, his single anxiety, he believes has passed muster, for no one has questioned it to his face. He is a careful man, at the very moment of a careful man's greatest danger, which is the moment he begins to feel secure. We must break that security, and we must break it in the one place he cannot bear to have it broken. He turned to Bellingham. "You will send for him. You will tell him in my hearing that a difficulty has arisen with the Sumatra Queen policy, that the underwriters at Lloyd's have queried Merrick's signature upon it, and that a specialist in questioned documents, a Mr. Holmes, has been engaged, and means this very afternoon to subject the signature to a chemical test that dates ink by its oxidation. You will say the test cannot be fooled, and that it will establish beyond dispute on what day the name was written. Then you will send him away to fetch the original policy from the strong-box, and you will leave him alone with that knowledge for a quarter of an hour." "And what will that accomplish?" I asked. "It will tell an innocent man nothing, for an innocent man has no reason to fear a test that will only confirm a genuine signature. But to the man who wrote that name last week, dated to the 11th, it is a sentence of death. He will know, as no one else in the office can know, that the ink will betray him, that within the hour the test will prove the signature fresh, and that a fresh signature dated before the death is a rope. A guilty man in that quarter hour does not sit still, he acts. And whatever he does to save himself, Watson, will be the confession no ledger could give us." It fell out very much as Holmes had foreseen, though not without a bad moment that reminded me my friend was a reader of men and not a prophet. Bellingham, sweating, played his part. Pruitt heard the news of the chemical test with a face so perfectly composed, so full of respectful concern for the syndicate's difficulty, that for a dreadful instant I believed we had wholly mistaken our man, and I saw the same doubt flicker even in Bellingham's eye. The clerk asked one quiet question, whether the test were truly so certain, and Bellingham said that it was, and Pruitt nodded gravely, and said what a mercy it was that science could set such a matter beyond dispute, and went off to the strong-room for the policy, as meek as a curate. "He did not turn a hair," I whispered, when he had gone. "Holmes, if we are wrong—" "We are not wrong," said Holmes, but he had drawn back into the shadow of the inner doorway, and his eyes never left the strong-room passage, and I saw that his own certainty was strung as tight as a wire. A man who feels no fear at such news either has nothing to fear, or has more self-command than any honest clerk was ever given. Wait. We waited. A minute passed, and another, and then from the strong-room passage there came not the sound of a man returning with a document, but the small, unmistakable scrape of a window sash raised with great care, and a draught of cold outer air breathed suddenly through the office. Holmes was across the room before I had understood. The strong-room stood empty, its little barred window open upon the leads at the back, and Alastair Pruitt was going along the roof-gutter toward the mews with the quick, low scuttle of a man who has kept, all his careful life, one road of escape mapped against this hour. He had not even taken the policy. He had taken only himself, and in the taking had told us everything. I will not dwell overlong upon the chase across the leads, for it was short and undignified, a scrambling business of slates greasy with soot, and a gutter that gave sickeningly underfoot, with the drop to the Meuse yawning below, and the fog pressing close, so that we went half by feel. Pruitt was no climber. His life had been lived at a desk, and the same body that had sat bowed over fair copies for 20 years betrayed him now on the roof. We came up with him against a chimney-stack, where he stood at last with his back to the brick and his careful composure gone to pieces, a grey and shaking man who had run out of both roof and years in the same moment. He did not fight. Men of his kind seldom do. Their courage is all in the ledger, in the long, patient nerve of the small theft, and it does not survive the open air. As I took his arm to bring him in from the edge, I felt him trembling through the thin cloth of his coat, and his breath came in the short, catching gasps of a man whose heart is labouring past its strength. And the physician in me noted, even then, that here was a frame worn thinner than its 40 years by some long private strain. He came down with us quietly, saying nothing, his eyes fixed on the middle distance, as a man's are when the thing he has dreaded for weeks has arrived at last, and brought, with its terror, a kind of dreadful ease. It was in the inner room, with the door shut and a constable sent for, that Josiah Merrick's death was finally told. Holmes did not bully him. He did the crueler thing, which was to lay the whole of it out in that dry, exact voice, so that Pruitt heard his own 3 years of cunning turned inside out and spread upon the table, and understood that there was nothing left to hide. You entered the true premiums, and you ceded the false surplus to a house that did not exist, Holmes said. For 3 years, perhaps longer, it was careful work, and it might have run for 20 had you not made the one mistake of the too careful man, which is to be more regular than the world. Merrick found it. His memory was your undoing. He carried the figures in his head where you could not reach them, and one day a total would not come right, and he pulled the thread. He paused. When did he tell you he knew? The clerk's mouth worked. When he spoke, the low, deferential voice was still there, but broken now, coming in pieces. The 16th. The afternoon of the 16th. He called me in. He had it all on a half-sheet in his own writing. Every entry, 3 years of them, in that fist of his. Pruitt's hands opened and closed. He was not angry. That was the worst of it, sir. He was never angry. He said I was to come back at the day's end, and we would go together to Mr. Bellingham, and I was to bring my books. He said it as if it were the merest matter of business. He said— the man's voice cracked. He said he was disappointed, that he had thought me a better clerk than a thief. And then he sent me back to my desk, and I sat there the whole afternoon, with the office going on about me, knowing that at 6 o'clock my life was over. So you did not wait until 6, said Holmes quietly. I followed him. It came out of Pruitt now, in a low, stumbling flood, the way such things come when the long holding is finally let go. He dined late, always, alone, at a chop-house by the river. I waited. It was dark when he came out, and he took the path along the water, by the stairs, the way he always went. There was no one. I did not. He stopped, and shook, and began again. I did not go there meaning it. I swear before God I did not carry it in my mind, sir. I went to plead with him. I went to beg, and he would not so much as stop walking. He said the matter was closed, and I was to save my breath for the magistrate. And he turned from me at the head of those stairs as if I were already nothing, already gone, and there was the black water below, and I— The rest was not words. The room was very still. Bellingham had turned away toward the window, unable to look at the man. "You put him into the river," said Holmes, "without cruelty and without mercy, only as a man setting down the last fact. The tide took him. I thought the tide would take him far, and I thought no one had seen, and I thought—" Pruitt pressed the heels of his hands to his eyes. "I thought if I said nothing, and let him be found, they would call it what they called it, misadventure, and so they did." He looked up, and there was something almost of wonder in his ruined face. "It worked, sir. That is the thing you cannot know. It worked. I had done the impossible thing and got away clean, and no man alive suspected me, and I should have stopped, if I had only stopped." "The policy," said Holmes, "the policy." Pruitt gave a laugh that was worse than weeping. "The Sumatra Queen. I had already begun the fraud on it before he ever found me out. His name was to go on it, and my little surplus with it, as it had 100 times, and after, when it must come forward to be countersigned, I saw that it would show a date, and if I dated it true, it would fall after his death, and the question would come. So I finished it. I sat at his own desk, sir, with his own inkstand that I had kept filled all along against just such a need, and I wrote his name one last time, and I dated it the 11th, safe before, and I thought I had closed the last door." He looked at Holmes with the dumb bewilderment of a man betrayed by the smallest thing. "How? I ask you as a dying man asks. I made that signature true, as ever I made one in 3 years. His own hand would not have known it from his own. How did you know it was false?" "Because it was true," said Holmes. "That was your error. A living man signs his name 1,000 times, and no two are the same. The hand tires, the pen catches, the mood shifts. Josiah Merrick's genuine signatures vary one from another, as all men's do. Yours did not. You had practiced his name to a perfection he himself never achieved, and you set down on that policy a signature more perfectly Merrick than Merrick ever was. It was too good. No living hand is so faithful to itself. And the ink you drew from his own careful inkstand was fresh and black, where 6 weeks in the air should have browned it. The signature said last week, and the date said October the 11th, and no honest paper tells 2 such different times at once." He rose. "You kept his inkwell filled, Pruitt, for the day you would need it. That is the detail I shall remember. A murderer's foresight, tending a dead man's ink." Lestrade came for him within the hour, and was gracious enough for Lestrade to admit that he had had the nephew's name written at the top of a warrant, and had been but a day from serving it. "You'd have hanged the wrong man on his own bad temper," Holmes told him, not unkindly, "which is the commonest way the wrong man hangs. Young Merrick is a wastrel and a poor mourner, but he was at his cards before 9 witnesses while his uncle drowned, and a poor mourner is not a murderer, whatever a jury would like to believe of him. Your man is the good clerk who wept for his master and filled his inkwell. Look to the ones who grieve too neatly, Lestrade. The honest griever is too busy grieving to do it well. It was evening before we were back in Baker Street, and the fog had come down thick over the town, so that the lamps in the street below were no more than soft smears of yellow in the murk. Holmes stood at the window a long while, saying nothing, and I let him be. There is a flatness that comes upon him always at the close of a case, when the chase is done and the machinery of his mind has nothing left to bite on, and I had learned that it passed best in silence. "He was right, you know," he said at last, not turning. "Pruitt, when he said it worked, that is the part that will stay with me." He drew on his pipe, and the bowl glowed and faded. He committed a murder that was taken for an accident, closed cleanly, mourned and buried and forgotten. If he had done nothing more, he would be at his high desk this evening, filling his inkwells of a Monday, and Josiah Merrick would be a line in the parish register, and no more. He was safe, Watson. He had done the impossible thing, and he could not leave it alone, because there was one more small profit to be skimmed off a policy, and the habit of the careful thief was stronger in him than the fear of the hanged man. The very quality that made him so good a criminal for 3 years was the quality that put the rope round his neck. He was undone by being exactly himself. "It is a kind of justice," I said. "It is the only kind I have ever much trusted." He turned from the window then, and the shadow had lifted a little from his lean face. "Not the justice of the courts, which convicts a nephew for looking guilty, but the justice of a man's own nature, running him at last on to the rocks he spent his life steering round. Merrick's memory undid the thief's own thoroughness undid the murderer. There is a neatness in it that almost reconciles me to a bad 3 years' work by a man who might, in another life, have kept honest books and died respected in his bed." He crossed to the shelf, took down the violin, and stood turning it in his hands without playing. "You will make a story of it, I suppose," he said. I had thought of it, though I hardly know what to call it. Call it what Bellingham called it, that first morning, when he did not know he had already told me the whole of the truth. Holmes tucked the instrument beneath his chin, and the first low notes stole out into the fog-muffled quiet of the room. "A dead man's signature. There is no witness harder to cross-examine, Watson, and none I have learned to trust less. The living may be doubted. It is the hand of the drowned we take on faith, and more fools we." And he shut his eyes and played, and I took up my pen, and outside the window the great fog held its silence over London, and over the Black River, and over the worn green stairs at Wapping, where a careful man had, for one moment only, failed to be careful, and lost everything.